Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have another excellent game to share with you from the 2024 FIDE candidates. On the white end are Praggnanandhaa playing against Abasov. So with this one we have a d-pawn based opening. 5 moves in, we reach this Tarrasch defense, symmetrical. Now out of this opening the structure can change in many ways. I'll be touching on a few of the ways. But first let's get a few more copycat moves in. A3 and A6. Each side is now ready to capture on C and then advance with the B pawns. So one of the ways the structure can change, given this central tension, white can take on C and then D. And there you go, we would have an isolated queen pawn position. Pragg, on this move 7, plays B3. He is in a way saying, I would prefer to take on a hanging pawns structure. Notice this 4th rank pawn duo is now fully supported by pawns. So white is in a position, in other words, to meet these captures with pawn recaptures, and there you go. We would have a hanging pawns structure. All right, let's see how this pawn play ends up panning out. C takes D, E takes, bishop E7, and C5. This one small step with the C pawn changes things significantly. There's a majority for white on the queen side 3-2, and a majority for black in the center 2-1. This is an invasive pawn in black's house. If black is going to challenge it, it should be challenged right away. We see just that. B6. White's reply is to capture on B6. Black recaptures. And we quickly go from that 3-2 majority to a 2-1. Now, what I want to emphasize here is an alternative for white, an alternative that is tempting but bad. And that is this move B4. Why is it tempting, first of all? Well, it's because after the smoke clears on this C5 square, white has a very strong, in general, this C5 pawn here is considered very strong because it is connected and passed. There's an issue, however, a timing issue, a lack of development issue, you might say, for white. Black would be able to pounce with a few active moves, pounce with a few timely active moves that will, at minimum, cause an inconvenience to white. And they are. It kicks off with knight e4. What would white do about this pressure on c3? You can't take on e4. Pawn recaptures, scares the f3 knight away from its defense of d4. d4 would collapse. Queen c2. In comes active move 2 of 3. You're all of a sudden in a pin. What are you doing about c3? Bishop b2. Black would already be winning after this third move, rook to b8. There's already a trick to take on b2, and then c3. Rook c1, there's a central break with e5. The position is quickly collapsing for Team White. Going somewhere else, by the way, with the bishop. Are you okay with the knight for bishop exchange? Yet again, rook b8 would be there. Possibilities of rook to b3. What we're seeing here is that trying to maintain this c pawn, we're seeing cases where black can quickly take advantage of this completely opened b file. In short, the timing for white to try and maintain a pawn on c5 is not quite right. If white had just a little bit more development, for instance, if this guy was already on d3, preventing the key knight to e4 move, things would be, could potentially be significantly different. Okay, in this game it is c takes b, queen takes b and b4, knight e4, knight a4. This is a big square to be sure. c5 point, 2 pawns controlling it, it's a hole. White's, in a way, trying to make it make sense. Let's put a piece there. Queen has to go somewhere, first of all. b8 is best. c7, you might say, she stays developed, but how comfortable is she going to feel once a rook is on the c file? She's going to have to move again, most likely. So she's most comfortable on b8. She also has an eye on supporting an e5 pawn break. Bishop e2, both sides castle, bishop f6, and bishop e3. The bishop can go to e3 or b2 to support d4. E3 is what you might describe a more stable post for the bishop, supported by a pawn. If you go to b2, this guy isn't always going to be here defending the bishop, does want to get into that c5 square. And there could easily be an issue along this file or even this diagonal. So it's a bit more cozy, I guess you could say, on e3. And now black has his eye on this, maybe even a quick transfer of the bishop to b5, trading bad for good bishop. The knight hops in right away, stopping any idea of maybe a bishop maneuver. At the same time, white has given up a big square on c3, and black hunts this good bishop for a knight. So how can white justify giving up a good bishop for a knight like this? Well, in a way, this guy, at the end of the day, is controlling the unopposed light square bishop. I mean, well, actually, as it stands right now, the structure, black structure alone is limiting the bishop, but this guy on c5 is also a contributor in controlling the light square bishop. So they, in a way, offset. From here, knight f5, rook a to b1, out of any tricks along the diagonal, and maybe nearby we can think about advancing the 2-to-1 majority now that the b pawn is defended. From here, we have the e5 break, d takes e, bishop recaptures, and the follow-up here is rook on f to d1. If there's knight takes bishop, queen takes, black could always get that bishop back. There is a pin on the bishop, so really not a good idea to invite the queen into that strong post. Rook f d1 it is, d4, and the follow-up here is bishop g5. Computer says you could also take on d4. I'm assuming Pragg wasn't thrilled about this position here, giving up the h-pawn. It's another way you can go. It's what the computer likes best, but certainly another move here, move played in the game, bishop g5. Nothing wrong with that. There's a threat on the bishop. Got to do something. In a way, maybe white is saying, I'd like to just win this pawn outright and not give up my h-pawn. So what is black's reaction? He goes back with the bishop. This may be a tempting move. Just defend the bishop and you're setting up bishop takes h2, winning the queen next. But you would be playing in this way as going into a self-pin. White would be able to play bishop f4, no bishop takes h2, and white is actually winning here. He could end up winning that pawn soon enough. After f6, he's going to win a big pawn. All right, in this one, simple enough. Bishop falls back to d6. And now, super duper committal move, g4. Don't try this. Another one of those don't try this at home moves that we see from time to time. There's a lot of weaknesses now on the king's side. 4 holes are created in just this one swing. The light squares in particular should light up in your mind. Black has an unopposed light square bishop. No quick way, though. No realistic way for black to, let's say, try and form a battery along this diagonal. Black queen, corner pocket for mate type ideas. First of all, what is black doing about this knight? Well, nothing. h6 is the best move, a counterattacking move. What else are you supposed to do? If you move the knight, taking, first of all, is looking pretty good, but even better is h3, and white claims the pawns restrict your silly knight. All right, in this one, best move played, h6, counterattack. And now we have queen e4. So one interesting note here is that if you take the knight, black would not be taking the bishop. Best would be bishop takes f5. What's the idea here? Well, if you try to save the bishop, there would be bishop takes rook, and then bishop takes knight, taking advantage of the pin. Black is winning here. So it's queen e4. Notice, since that e-pawn has advanced, there's now some new squares available to this bishop that the knight doesn't control. So these squares here, the queen stepping up and, in a way, assisting with the knight in trying to tame the light square bishop. In comes pawn takes bishop, pawn takes knight, rook a7. This is the very best move. If this rook can get activated, I think, this bishop starts to feel maybe not as awkward. It's not in the way of the rook. If the rook can just slide over here. All right, we follow up with rook takes d4, and now g4. So this is a pretty sharp move. Once the rook took a step up, there's one less defender on b1. And if in this position you take on g4, the move played is knight g5. If you take on g4, there would be bishop takes knight. Yet again, taking advantage of an unprotected piece. The computer points out that the very best move here is to actually double the rooks, but I really don't see any human playing in this way. What's the idea? Well, you would have to see a variation like this, some quiet moves with f6, and then king h1 and rook to g1. I don't see a human pulling this one off. Several quiet moves like this in a position where you're down a minor piece. Don't see it happening. Much more human. Move played here, very strong move still. Knight g5. Black takes the h-pawn, king g2, and now we have the offer of a queen exchange. It's around an evenish position here, slightly better for white. White says, if we're going to exchange queens, do it on my terms here, maybe help improve my knight. We have that. Knight is a little bit better, I believe, on this e4 square instead of g5. Bishop now falls all the way back to b8. This is now considered close to decisive for white, with the bishop going all the way back. So what is considered best is bishop f4. When the bishop goes to b8, how might you describe it? It's a one-directional bishop. But if you go to f4, it is a multi-directional bishop. Why doesn't the bishop go to f4 is a question I had for myself when preparing for this video. I don't believe it's because black was concerned about knight d3, because if knight d3 is in, then the bishop could go back, and black can at least say, well, I've demoted one of your knights before going all the way back, and now I have access to b7. I believe it's that maybe black was concerned about the follow-up move f3. And black really wouldn't have any better in this position than to take. And this, in general, isn't really something you should be welcome to as black. Right? The king has just improved and has done so with tempo. The king would prefer to be on f3 here, a little bit closer to the center. But it still says in this position, black is, about holding here. But you would have to shift gears. Maybe a difficult thing for black to do. You would have to shift gears in what way? The bishop would have to take on a different diagonal, providing some kingside defense rather than going to b8. All right, at the end of the day, the bishop goes all the way back. And we follow now with f6. This is the very best move. So there's going to be an issue. There's this idea of maybe doing something along the g file and the h file. So for instance, in the game, bishop f4 is played, but if you take on f6, This is now completely winning, would be completely winning for white. Knight takes f6. White would connect knights. And here we go. Rook g5, rook h1 for mate. And how do you defend against that idea? Bishop to f4 here would not work because there's a fork on h5 and the bishop will be picked up. So after this f6 move, we do have bishop f4. No rook g5 ideas. White doubles. Computer's a fan of doing something along the h-file. Rook here, rook there. Some defensive resource involved with bishop to h6. Okay. We have the rooks doubled on the d-file. Very human, solid. Rook c7 follows. Gets simplified a bit soon enough. Get a couple exchanges in here. A bit of some odd moves for the rook, but black is apparently holding here. The rook on c6. Kind of weird. a7, c7, c6. Increasing the pressure now on f6. Knight d6. The bishop is in the crosshairs and now defended with g5. Knight takes bishop. 35 moves. That bishop did not move. It is swiped. We're approaching time control right around here. We get the knight for bishop exchange and a pair of rooks off. What is white's idea? Well, the a-pawn is in the crosshairs. Now, this is where black goes wrong, and I must say it is very easy to go wrong here. The move played in the game is rook takes pawn. I mean, who isn't going to play rook takes pawn here? What is considered one of the best moves? Well, it's rook d7. The idea to activate this rook, be in a position where you're a blink away from targeting these passed pawns. The rook will be ideally placed behind a passed pawn. And additionally, there's a pin on the f-pawn, so there are these ideas of g3, hammering away at the f2 pawn. Now, what is the issue with taking this f-pawn? Well, we're going to see. This rook ends up getting stuck. Black is not in position to exchange rooks. This king is really far away from helping to stop these two connected passed pawns. Black tries to maintain the rook with rook f5. If you exchange rooks instead, there's no stopping the b pawn. I mean, the bishop will eventually have to give itself up for the b pawn, and white wins with this a pawn still alive. So he tries to hang on to the rook, but now in comes knight d7, knight d7 or e4. Close to the same idea, both focused on f6. This is the big idea, get into f6 with check and then track down the g-pawn. Black's reply, sensible enough. King to g7, no knight f6 here. But now we have rook a5, and the rook exchange is forced. There's no ducking the rook exchange. King g6 is the follow-up. If you instead initiate the exchange, how are you stopping this guy? Here's the box. Can the king enter the box in one move? No. If he can't, the king can't stop the pawn. So that means it's down to the bishop, but how does the bishop stop the pawn? This knight is controlling all these important dark squares. No way to stop the pawn from getting to this a7 square. So what's tried here is king g6. There's only one winning move here for white, and he finds it. Plays a4. If he isn't precise here, white is not precise, and he initiates this exchange, the king is a hair closer to these pawns. He would be there in time to stop the passed pawns. So for instance, you play b5 here. Can the king enter the box here? If he can, he'll be able to track down the pawn. He is there right away, and he's there with tempo against the knight. The bishop is still assisting as well. But the timing He says, you take me. I'm going to continue pushing my a-pawn. The rooks, white knows they're coming off. It's winning now. Only after the white pawn is on a4 does white now take on f5, and then he advances with the more dangerous passed pawn, and that is the a pawn. More dangerous for two reasons. Further away from the black king, and the bishop doesn't control that promotion square, so it has to work that much harder, that much faster to stop it from getting to a7, and it can't get to a7. There's an attempt with the follow-up move g takes f, but after a6, this one goes no further. Black simply resigns. This last move by black does free up e3 for the bishop, but if bishop e3 is played here, simple interference would follow. Knight c5 cuts the bishop from its defense of a7, and it's smooth sailing from here for the pawn. But that's as far as it goes in this one. After a6, black simply resigns. So, what did you think of this one? Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.